Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Cassie Villela and I'm a realtor, property manager, and investor here in San Antonio, Texas. On my channel, we talk about all things real estate, from data and investing to home and garden. So if that's your cup of tea, then like, follow, subscribe. I'm gonna link all the social media channels below. Today I'm really excited because we're gonna be doing like a top 5 video. We're gonna be doing top 5 things to look for when you're buying a flip. So, we know that a lot of the neighborhoods in San Antonio that are the hottest right now are the neighborhoods with very, very old homes. So I'm talking about Dignity Hill, Denver Heights, Highland Park, Tobin Hill, kind of all of the downtown areas that are kind of up and coming, Woodlawn, and then just all over the city as well. There's always going to be flips. Investors are always doing that. If you're an investor, make sure you watch, because make sure you're not doing these things that I'm going to talk about, that I'm going to warn people about. Let's be ethical. Let's be good investors. Let's be good flippers. Let's not prove the stereotype, please. So I've showed a lot of flips and, advised my clients away from a lot of very bad flips. And so I've got my top 5 worst things that you need to look for if you're buying a flip. Number 1, I would say most important, is you need to search the city website for permits. I will definitely link that below because it is really hard to find. It's called a weird thing, and every time I go try to find it, even I struggle, even though I do it often. So I will find that and link it below, but you can search the San Antonio website for permits, and that's very useful because you can just put in the address and see all of the permits that have been pulled for that address. Now, you might be saying, like a lot of people are like, that's stupid. Why do I need a permit? If the work is done right, who cares, right? First of all, the permit does ensure that a third-party inspector looked at the work and made sure that it was done up to code. That does protect you as the homeowner. That protects you against shoddy work, really bad contractors, shortcuts that they could pull. So it's really good to have those permits. For example, if a foundation permit is pulled, the inspector has to look before the foundation is poured. They have to inspect it afterwards to make sure it was done properly. You usually have like an engineer's report in there. So, it's just ensuring that somebody else has looked at the work and has approved it. And it's especially important because a lot of the stuff they look at, your inspector won't be able to see. Like electrical stuff, once they cover up the walls, you can look at the panel, but you can't really look at how it was wired. Plumbing's the same way, foundation's the same way. It's really hard to look after the fact and see the problems. So permits are really important. The second reason permits are really important is because if the permit is not pulled, the strike force for the city can put a stop work order on the house. And so you might think, well, all the work is done. I'm already buying it. So we got away with it. We got away with not pulling permits. It's fine. It's not fine, because I have seen situations where the day after closing, or even the day of closing, or even a week after closing, the strike force puts the stop work order on the house, and the new homeowners are now dealing with code enforcement. And what code enforcement does is they shut off electricity and water to the house until all of the permits are pulled and everything is done properly. And that means like tearing out sheetrock, tearing out a lot of things so that the inspectors can see what's in the wall, what they were supposed to see if the work was done properly and the permit was pulled. So I really cannot stress enough, if you are buying a house and the permits were not pulled, run away, because even if the work is done perfectly, even if it's a great house. I actually last week had a client that we looked at a flip and it was done very well. I really thought, like, this is a great house. They actually replaced the electrical, the plumbing, the water heater, the HVAC. They actually redid everything properly. They didn't just put lipstick on a pig like a lot of flippers do. But when we got, there were no permits pulled. And I texted the agent and I said, hey, there's no permits on this. you might want to warn your client that this could happen, these bad things could happen, you know, and you as an agent, you should know this. No response. Radio silence. You know, it's important. Permits are important. Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox. I just need you to know how important those permits are, because a lot of people kind of dismiss it. The city, though, with all of the flips that's happened, you know, all of the bad flips that have happened, the city is cracking down on permitting. So you make sure you get a permit. Okay, moving on. Number 2, electrical. So a lot of times a flipped home is going to be an older home. And so there's 2 electrical things you need to watch out for in particular. Obviously, there's a lot of electrical things that could be wrong with the house. You could have like the outlets not be grounded if it's an old home. Sometimes flippers will just replace the outlets with a 3-prong like grounded outlet, but they didn't actually ground it. It's still not grounded, which can be really dangerous, especially if you have children. So you're gonna want, your inspector will be able to tell you. They have a little machine that can tell. So that's important. But the 2 really big ones, especially if you're buying an older home, are gonna be knob and tube wiring. So if you open the electrical panel, if it's ancient, first of all, if you open the electrical panel and instead of seeing breaker switches, so like black breaker switches like we're used to seeing, if you see like circles like this, that's knob and tube wiring. It's not necessarily terrible. Like, I've had electricians look at it and say like, actually it's still in really good shape, and as long as you don't overload the electrical system, it should still be fine. But so it's one of those things, like, it's okay, but a lot of people won't buy a house with knob and tube wiring. Like, it's not going to handle, it wasn't built for the amount of electrical devices that we have today. Like, you're not going to be able to use like a full-blown hair dryer. It's something to keep in mind. It's something to look for. Another thing is aluminum wiring. So knob and tube wiring is probably going to be like before 1970. Aluminum wiring is going to be like in the 70s. So if the home was built in the 70s, you want to look really closely and see if it's copper or aluminum wiring. If it's aluminum wiring, that's, you know, a fire hazard. There are some, you know, you can change out the panel if the wiring is in good shape, and there's a special way that they do that. I would look out for a Federal Pacific panel, or I think it's Federal. Oh my gosh, it's in my house. You would think I wouldn't. I'm having a brain fart right now. I'm gonna like tell my editor and he's gonna put it right here, please. Carlos, thank you. But if you have that kind of panel, those are really bad, and we're replacing ours because it's really bad. We bought an older home. We bought a flipped home, actually, where the flippers did a terrible job. Like, they literally put lipstick on a pig. The only reason we bought it is because it's on almost an acre of land. We have a forest as a backyard, and so I was like, hey, if you'll come down on the price, like 60 grand, I'll buy it and I'll replace everything myself. So that's what we're in the process of doing. But, you know, we flip homes and stuff. Like, we can do that. But I wouldn't suggest, if you're just regular homeowner, you don't invest, you don't have contractors, I would run away from aluminum wiring or knob and pull wiring. Electrical, knob and tube aluminum wiring, try to avoid. Number 3, foundation issues. So again, with these older homes, they've been around a long time. San Antonio has clay soils. So foundation problems are like a dime a dozen in San Antonio. A lot of houses have foundation problems because the clay, you know, expands and contracts. We have crazy weather here. So it'll be like really, really rainy and then be like drought for 2 years. So the shrinking and expanding of that clay really makes problems with the foundation. So, you know, you want to really pay attention to that. One thing that I do, I carry in my car a ball, like a heavy but small ball, and I take it to showings. And if we're looking at a house and it seems, you know, you can just kind of feel like maybe this is a little uneven or maybe this is sloping a bit, I just set the ball down. And if it rolls, you got a foundation issue. So simple, you know, really easy to tell without having to get like a foundation company out. Definitely grab a ball, take that to showings. Second, a lot of the older homes, especially if you're looking in like the Denver Heights, Dignity Hill, Highland Park, Tobin Hill, all of those areas where the homes were built in the 20s or 30s, they're going to be pier and beam. A concrete foundation, a slab foundation, it's like just a slab of concrete, right, that you build a house on. Pier and beam is going to be where they're actually like piers, like tubes. Now, back in those times, they weren't concrete. They were actually usually cedar posts. So cedar posts of wood dug down into the ground, and then beams across, and then the subfloor on top of that. So pier and beam, right? You have a few problems there. You want to look for, obviously, like whether it's level, like that's the ball trick, right? Also want to look at those beams and at the piers. So cedar can rot, I mean, it's wood, right? So it can rot out. If you have a leak in the house, that beam can start to rot. And that's obviously, it's holding up the whole house, so it's going to cause a problem. What I always do if I'm showing a house that has a pier and beam foundation, usually there will be like a door or something, because that's a crawl space where all of the plumbing and electrical and everything is. So contractors, if something goes wrong, they need to get in there and crawl in there and fix it. So there's usually like an opening somewhere in the skirting that's hiding the pier and beam foundation. If there is one, you need to open it and you need to get a flashlight and look inside. You want to look for rotting wood. That's a huge one. You know, just kind of looking at, does it look like it was done properly? You know, sometimes things just look wrong, right? You want to look at that. You might find some crazy things. I was showing a house one time and I did this, and literally a jack was holding up one of the beams. Like, instead of a post, like an actual jack. And I was like, yeah, we're gonna go. Like, if that's there, they didn't do the other stuff right. Like, just come on, you know? So you want to look at that. The best thing to do is actually to replace those cedar posts with concrete posts, like with sonotubes, and fill them with concrete. That's the absolute best thing to do. I actually really like pier and beam foundations in San Antonio because we have the issues, and it's easier to fix a foundation issue in pier and beam. So I actually like them. I wouldn't steer you away from a pier and beam foundation. I would just make sure it's not being held up by a jack. Another foundation issue that I see all the time, and this is not just on flips, it's on all San Antonio houses. Everybody wants to add an addition to their house, right? We want to make these houses bigger, especially if they're really old houses and they were small. We want to put an addition. A lot of people will just take, if there's like an existing porch, they'll just put walls and a roof and call it a room, right? That's not a good idea. That porch, that slab on that porch is it's built differently than the slab that's holding up your house. It wasn't built to hold up a room. So what happens over time, the weight from the roof gets distributed on the outside of that. So you have your foundation here, you have your addition here, this addition starts to, and it actually pulls away from the house. And I always go, when I see an addition, I go outside and I look, and you can see it, depending on how old it is, how long ago it was done, you can actually see it pulling away from the house at the top. So definitely look for that. If there's an addition, you want to make sure it was tied into the house properly. They actually like shoot rebar down into the concrete, like at an angle, and that will keep it from doing this, right? So you want to make sure that was done. If it's just still concrete, if they haven't tiled over it or carpeted or anything, you can just see the rebar. If you see like every couple of feet, like a rebar, like a tiny hole with a little bit of rebar showing, then it was done right and it's probably okay. If they've tiled or carpeted over it, you need to ask, did y'all do this? Because that one, it's so common. It's so common. So foundation, number 3 was foundation. Number 4, this one's short, windows. You know, old houses have old windows, especially like 60s, 50s, 60s through the 90s really, are single pane. So if you're if you're buying a house built in the 80s, 70s, 60s, if it has single pane windows, you know, that's going to be a problem. I have kids. I've moved into houses with single pane windows. The windows get broken, like just so fast. The windows get broken. We moved into a house that was built in like 1985 a few years ago. And within a month, my 3-year-old had broken 3 windows. Just because like at one point he threw a sippy cup and it just went straight through the window. Like, So, know that if you're buying a home with single pane windows, you're probably going to end up replacing them. And windows are expensive. Windows are very expensive. So if you're buying a flip, they really should replace the windows if they're single pane. That is really a huge upgrade. It's very expensive to replace them yourself. So just either, again, the house I'm living in that the flippers did a terrible job, single pane window. I broke all of these rules myself. Every single one of these rules I broke because I really wanted the house. So, you can take on those problems and say, I'm aware that I have to replace these windows and it's going to cost me an arm and a leg. I just want you to be aware. If you're doing that, do it because you know what you're getting into. Otherwise, windows are super expensive. Fifth and final is going to be plumbing. So plumbing, if you're buying a home that was built before 1970, you want to look for cast iron pipes. You can tell if a home has cast iron pipes, look under the kitchen sink, because usually you will see like the PVC piping, that has like the P-trap and it's going. And then there at the bottom, when it feeds into the sewer line, you'll see that it's like cast iron. It's like a brown old pipe, right? That's how you know. That's where you need to look. Now, cast iron is bad because over time, it just falls apart. Like it rusts out. It's iron and we're putting water through it. Like, I don't know who thought of this, but they weren't using their brain because they're just rotting, right? I had, so our house again, cast iron pipes. So we replaced them. Unlike the thing they pulled out of the concrete, I was just like horrified. Like it had all these holes and roots had grown in. I mean, it was terrible. And it was very expensive to fix. It was only a few feet of pipe that was in the slab. Luckily for us, it was on the edge of the slab, and it was still $4,000 for them to jackhammer that pipe out and replace it with PVC. Know that if the house has cast iron pipes, you will have to replace them. It's not a matter of maybe they'll be, you will definitely have to replace them, and it will be so expensive. Like if they're in the middle of the house, I'm talking like $20,000. It's something that, again, if you know what you're getting into and you get a good deal on something, sure. But if you're a regular homeowner, you don't want to move into a house with these problems. So cast iron pipes is really the biggest one to look for. Another thing I do, because sometimes you can't really see the foundation problems, right? Maybe they fixed it. And when they fix foundation issues, they go in and they level it out. Well, if there are plastic pipes in that foundation, those can break. And then if those break, you have a plumbing issue. So what I always do on a showing is I turn on all of the plumbing fixtures at once. Every sink, every bathtub, I turn it on and we let it run for about 10 minutes. Because that can show you if that starts to back up, then you have a problem. You have something's going wrong. It's not draining correctly. So that's an easy way to make sure that the plumbing is okay. I hope that was helpful. That was my 5 top things that I look for at flips. There's a lot of others. Use your common sense, look really closely. Their flippers are really good at making it look beautiful, at staging it. Pull back curtains, move furniture, look at things really closely and make sure that they're done properly before you buy a flip. And if you have any other suggestions, or if you have a horror story from buying a flip, or if you have any other comments, definitely comment below. And again, please a like or a follow really, really helps my channel. I appreciate you. See you in the next one.